Russia thought June was hell. The worst month of 2026 so far, and one of Russia's worst since Putin launched his invasion, left the entire nation battered and bruised. Taking the Donbas seemed further away than ever. Russian troops were dying left and right, and the summer offensive had become a failure before it ever really got off the ground. Then, July came, and Russia found out that it could get much, much worse. The month that will break Putin has just concluded, and yet, utterly lost in his delusion, Putin still tries to claim that everything is going to plan. His fantasy world has come crashing down, and he is the last to know. June 2026 was an absolute nightmare for Russia, and the numbers from the month back that up. Nothing went to plan for Putin's patsies. By the end of the month, Russia's obsessed leader had churned through another 39,490 of his people, representing a high watermark in the first half of 2026, when Russia had already been averaging over 30,000 losses per month. Recruitment wasn't keeping up. Volunteers were signing up at a rate of as little as 24,000 per month, marking the first time since the war began that Ukraine was eliminating more soldiers than Russia could bring to the field. And in the Donbas, which Putin has demanded be claimed by the end of 2026, Russia's progress was so glacial that Al Jazeera reported that it would take another 14 years for Russia to claim Donetsk if it continued at its current rate. 39,490 soldiers at a rate of advance of just 1.03 square kilometers per day would have been a catastrophe in anyone's book. And it was. But one bright spot, Russia must have thought, is that it surely couldn't get much worse. Ukraine's meat grinder would have to break down at some point. Maybe it will, but that point sure as hell didn't come in July. Off the back of experiencing a month so bad that it should have left Putin red-faced, Russia has only gone and topped itself with more casualties in July. On August 1st, Ukraine's general staff took to Telegram to deliver the big number: 42,860 casualties suffered by Russia in July. That isn't just a record breaker for 2026 so far, it's an embarrassment to Putin at the height of a summer offensive that is supposed to collapse the Donetsk fortress belt. That isn't going to happen. Russia won't even come close. What Putin has just seen here is yet another example of the fact that the running cost of his invasion is so high that Russia simply can no longer sustain it. 42,860 casualties in July breaks down to about 1,382 soldiers killed, injured, or captured every single day in Ukraine. It also adds to a 2026 running total that has now reached 238,650. We also can't ignore the fact that July's casualty figure is over 3,000 more than we saw in June. This can't be explained by July having an extra day than June. Something deeper is going on here. Month by month, Ukraine is becoming more lethal, and the sacrifices that Russian forces have to make are growing higher. The numbers prove it. Let's head back to January. That month saw Ukraine kick off its 2026 campaign with a bang. By the end of the month, 31,700 Russians had been killed or otherwise eliminated from the fight. A good start to the year, but by the end of February, Putin might have thought that he had a reason to cheer. The casualty rate went down dramatically. Russia only lost around 26,100 soldiers in February. Sure, that's still over 1.5 times more than it lost in its entire decade-long war with Afghanistan back in the 1980s, but it was a start. The number was coming down. However, raw numbers can be deceiving. February has 3 fewer days than January, which played a role. At a February casualty rate of 932 soldiers per day, those extra 3 days would have added almost 2,800 more Russians to the monthly figure. That would mean the month would wind up 100 shy of 29,000 casualties, still less than January. But not by so wide a margin that Putin could start celebrating. By spring, Putin felt pretty confident. Russia had its massive spring and summer offensive lined up. The harsh Ukrainian winter was finally over, and that meant that Russia could spend the next 6 months or more launching stronger attacks against Ukraine's fortifications. Ukraine was going to break. Putin just knew it. But Russia's leader was wrong. In March, Russia's casualties rocketed back up to 31,960, far more than February and just a touch above the already ridiculous January figure. And from there, the numbers kept rising: 32,980 in April, 33,760 in May, June added almost 6,000 to the monthly casualties, and July has added another 3,000 and change. We are not seeing any one-offs here. This is a pattern, a month-by-month demonstration of how Ukraine is becoming more lethal. What Putin faces now is a 2026 that could very easily result in Russia losing 500,000 of its soldiers by the end of December. If Ukraine maintains the same rate of attrition that we saw in July for the next 5 months, Russia loses another 214,300 soldiers. That would be almost 453,000 lives flushed down the drain for Putin's Ukraine obsession, and over 1.66 million in total since the invasion began. But remember the pattern: every month bar one in 2026 has seen Ukraine eliminate more Russian soldiers than it did the month before. Russia has lost over 11,000 more soldiers in July than it lost in January. If Ukraine keeps up this pattern, it's not outside the realm of possibility that Russia will be at 50,000 losses per month by the end of the year. That wouldn't be a coincidence. 50,000 per month has been Ukraine's plan all along. Back in January, then newly installed and now former Defense Minister of Ukraine Mikhailo Fedorov declared that 50,000 soldiers was the magic number. If Ukraine could reach that monthly target, Russia wouldn't be able to replenish its losses anymore without a damaging round of mobilization that makes Putin vulnerable socially and politically on his own turf. They view people as a resource, and shortages are already evident, Fedorov said at the time. July has just proven that, and Putin's big problem now is that he's running out of the one resource he needs to stand a chance against Ukraine. Okay, Russia's military command might think, we'll just not mention the massive casualty figures to Putin. He doesn't need to know, and we don't need to have accidental falls out of windows. What we'll do instead is showcase the amazing advances that Russia made in July in return for these sacrifices. Yeah, about that. Russia coupled its worst month of 2026 so far with a rate of advance so pathetic that you could barely call it an advance at all. The very best that Russia can claim is that it at least managed to steal more territory in July than it did in June, and it did by just 0.19 square kilometers per day. That's according to the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, which reports that Russia managed to claim, not infiltrate, actually claim, just 37.85 square kilometers of Ukraine in July. Context, that means Russia burned through around 1,132 soldiers for every square kilometer that it managed to fully occupy in Ukraine in July. That's low. Not the lowest Russia has achieved in 2026, but very low. In July 2025, Russian forces managed to capture 455.74 square kilometers. A year later, it hasn't managed a tenth of that figure, despite being in the midst of the summer offensive that was supposed to bring about the collapse of Donetsk and the fall of the Donbas. And that's another point. This big offensive that we keep talking about. According to ISW, it's managed to achieve the sum total of 0 operationally significant gains. Russia hasn't managed to capture anything of consequence. It certainly hasn't put the massive dents into the fortress belt that Putin anticipated. The best it has managed is to send infiltrators into Konstantinivka, while actually only claiming a very small portion of the city. Konstantinivka still stands, and 3 even more fortified cities in the belt will have to fall if Russia does manage to break through. Keep that city in mind, by the way, we'll be coming back to it. A change in Ukrainian strategy has played a huge role in Russia's woes, not just in July, but throughout 2026. Targeted counterattacks have led to Ukraine reclaiming territory, especially in the south. That forces Russia to divert soldiers that would otherwise have been destined for Donetsk. Ukraine's drone dominance, both in the kill zones that stretch for kilometers beyond the front and in the middle strike range, where drones are destroying Russian logistics, is also massive for Ukraine and devastating for Russia. Russia's big problem now is that its entire campaign is optimized around positional warfare, in a conflict where maneuver warfare is more important than ever, the ISW says. And there's one more little insult to Russia's July injuries to add before we get to Putin and his delusions. On August 3rd, the Kyiv Independent reported on findings by the Russian outlet Mediazona. Working alongside the BBC's Russian service, Mediazona has been able to confirm the identities of 236,066 Russians who have been killed in Ukraine since the beginning of the war. Those figures break down into 86,600 volunteers, 26,200 prisoners recruited into the fight, and 19,000 mobilized soldiers. You can also add close to 7,500 Russian military officers to the list. Now, you might have just heard these numbers and thought they sound a little strange, almost like they don't gel with the casualty figures we've already shared. You'd be right, and there's a reason why. The 236,066 dead are just those that Mediazona can confirm. The outlet says that the real number is significantly higher, as its information comes from obituaries, regional media reports, local authorities, and social media posts by relatives. If families, press, and authorities aren't talking about a soldier's death, which is more likely than not in Russia, then it isn't getting recorded, and it can't be verified. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky himself says the real number is much higher, 700,000 Russians dead, at a time when Ukraine has achieved a ratio of one of its soldiers killed in action for every 14 Russians. Add injuries and captures to that figure and it's easy to see how Ukraine is breaking records for monthly casualties in 2026. And still, Putin doesn't seem to see any of it. Quite the opposite. He's claiming that everything in Ukraine is going according to plan. It isn't. And you're about to find out why Putin is so insane that he thinks Russia is winning. But before you do, this is a reminder that you're watching the military show. There's a lot more where this comes from, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel and have notifications enabled so you don't miss what's coming next. We take you to a July 26th meeting that involved Putin and Russian Navy personnel. Putin officially lost the plot during this meeting. Beyond claiming that there is no aggression whatsoever on Russia's part in Ukraine, and that Russia had been forced to start its so-called special military operation due to the Western side and the Kyiv regime, Putin ranted and raved about how Ukraine would fall, and that was just the start. I'm certain, by the way, that sooner or later, Ukraine will lose these Western lands, and what used to belong to Poland, Hungary, Romania will sooner or later, maybe not tomorrow, not the day after, in a year or two, 10 or 15 years, but everything will historically fall back into place, Russia's leader declared. Putin, please. You'll be lucky to have Donetsk in 10 or 15 years, never mind Poland or Romania. Putin is suggesting that everything is going according to plan in Ukraine, even though it isn't happening because there's no actual aggression. Except there is, and it's all the West's fault, and the Kyiv regime and… Hold on a second, our heads are spinning. What we see from Putin here is outright delusion. Nothing is going according to plan, but Putin acts like it is, and there's more to come. The only question we can ask at this point is how Putin can make these types of claims 4.5 years into a war that has cost Russia so much, and on the back of the country's worst month in 2026. The answer is simple. Putin may genuinely think that Russia is winning because his generals lie through their teeth to hide the truth away from him. That's according to the ISW, and we'll let the think tank do the talking here. The Russian northern grouping of forces and high military command are likely lying to the Kremlin about the extent of Russian gains in northern Ukraine in order to further the narrative that Russian forces are actively advancing across the entire theatre, including a part of the front line that has been largely stagnant for nearly 2 years, the ISW declared in its July 31st assessment of Russia's offensive campaign. What we're seeing there is likely a microcosm of something that's been happening from the moment that Putin launched his invasion. This is a man who surrounds himself with toadies and sycophants. He shouldn't be surprised that none of them will tell him the truth, and will instead use artificially generated footage and other fake informational tools to make it seem like Russia is doing much better than it is. The ISW points to Russia's northern commanders as culprits. We have seen this lying being used to influence Putin in the Donbas. In mid-July, Russia claimed that it had captured Konstantinivka. You may remember that city. If Russia is to be believed, Konstantinivka has been occupied, and it can move on to the rest of the fortress belt. It's all lies. The city is still a battleground and looks likely to remain that way for the rest of the year at least. The best that Russia has managed is Infiltration, where it sends tiny units of 2 or 3 soldiers to go and hide away from Ukraine. Those infiltrators are present in almost all of Konstantinivka, that much appears to be true. But infiltration isn't occupation, not by a long shot. Scattered and isolated units of infiltrators can't do much once they reach their hidey holes. They exist to wait for support or get killed by Ukrainian search and destroy squads, usually the latter. If this is all according to plan, as Putin is claiming, then the plan is ridiculous. The reason why Russia's advance is so slow and bloody is that the infiltration strategy makes Russian soldiers vulnerable, both as they trek through the drone-infested kill zones and when they've reached their destinations. Putin accepts the casualties either because he doesn't actually know about them or he believes the sacrifices are worth it because Russia is making rapid progress. Only the progress is fake. Russia's leader, isolated from those who might tell him the truth, is now unhinged, lost in a delusion that makes him impossible to negotiate with, and is leading him closer to mobilizing 500,000 soldiers because he thinks they will give Russia the final push it needs to win the war, despite Donetsk still being nowhere close to falling. Putin has lost his mind. And to paraphrase Stanley from The Office, boy, will Ukraine help him find it. The reality that drowns out Putin's delusion is that July has broken Russia. Putin isn't a strong leader. He's a man who has never been more trapped than he is right now, stuck between his imperial obsession and the reckless escalation that has led Russia into this casualty-riddled dead end in the first place. Le Monde says that Russia is now being held hostage by Putinism, and it's bang on the money. The only thing that Putin has achieved since February 2022 are the complete isolation of Russia from the Western world, the destruction of his own nation's economy, and the loss of geopolitical influence as the special military operation proves to those who once relied on Russia for protection that Russia isn't anywhere near as strong as it claims. Putin is a man obsessed. Unable to comprehend a version of Russia that must exist within the borders drawn up in 1991 upon the collapse of the Soviet Union. So he has created a fantasy world where Putin is king and he leads Russia to the reclamation of all the lands that were taken from it. Only none of it is real. What is real are 42,860 Russians dead, injured, or captured in July. Reality is the 1.4 million plus and counting who have had their lives destroyed by Putin, all for a war that grinds on with seemingly no end in sight. Putin is a man obsessed with ideology and his own twisted version of history. Perhaps he looks at what happened in July as an opportunity for his legacy to be celebrated. These sacrifices will go down in history, much like the Soviet sacrifices during World War II, and will become part of the Russian mythos. Again, it's all in Putin's fantasy. And Russia's leader prefers these delusions because the reality is that Ukraine is strong and getting stronger. Our teams understand that right now we have a window of opportunity. Ukraine has become stronger both on the battlefield and in the air, and everyone sees the corresponding results, Zelensky declared on July 9th. It's hard to argue with him, and as Ukraine grows stronger still, the genius of its strategy will shine through. Ukraine doesn't need to win against Russia. It doesn't need to push Putin's forces back so far that they end up on the other side of the border. Ukraine's approach is all about attrition, make the cost of the war so heavy that nobody inside Russia, not even the delusional Putin, will be able to ignore it. The 50,000 per month goal that Fedorov set for Ukraine in January now seems more attainable than ever. Russia is losing hundreds, even thousands of soldiers for every square kilometer that it gains. This is how Ukraine wins. Inflict so much death that Russia can't go on any longer. July was a catastrophe for Russia, and though Putin will continue to live in his own little bubble, babbling about how everything is going according to plan on the few occasions when he emerges from his bunker, the Russian people can see the collapse of their country coming. Now we wait until the end of August. It's almost inevitable that we'll be telling you about another record broken. And if Putin thought that high-level military shakeups in Ukraine might have given Russia some reprieve, he has another thing coming. Oleksandr Syrskyi may be out as the commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces, but Mikhailo Drapachy is in, and he is a nightmare so massive that he might just be able to pop the fantasy dream bubble that Putin has created for himself. Find out why by watching our video. But before you do, don't forget to subscribe to The Military Show to see more of our insights into the latest developments in the Ukraine war. And thank you, as always, for watching.